good to start commentary, correct? Good evening from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Stephen Clark, editor of spaceflightnow.com, and you're looking live at the third segment, a new segment of SpaceX's Starship launch pad tower in motion now. Actually, it's stopped, but it's been moving from SpaceX's facility at Roberts Road here at the Kennedy Space Center on the move toward Pad 39A for stacking to continue the construction of the new gantry tower at this launch complex to support future launches of SpaceX's Super Heavy booster and Starship vehicle. You can see this segment standing about 5 stories tall, just beyond the tree line. In the background, you can see to the right, one of the buildings associated with the Blue Origin's facility for constructing and developing the New Glenn launch vehicle. And you can also see some power lines here in this field of view. These power lines were recently raised at Kennedy to enable the movement of space hardware across the Space Center. So right now, this segment has been on the move. It left the Roberts Road site a short while ago. That's where SpaceX has been building up these individual segments, constructing various structural and mechanical elements of the launch pad, and then transferring these completed individual elements or near complete individual elements out toward Pad 39A, where a large crane is in position to raise each segment on top of one another, eventually constructing a tower that will stand about 450 feet tall, approximately 450 feet tall, and consist of up to 9 individual segments. Tonight, segment number 3 is on the way to Pad 39A and is expected to be stacked on top of segments number 1 and 2, already in place, either early tomorrow or in the coming days, to continue the buildup of this launch facility for SpaceX's next generation heavy lift, super heavy lift launch vehicle. This gantry segment left the Roberts Road facility and headed north and east. Right now, it appears to be at an intersection. We'll take a left turn on a specialized transporter that SpaceX has built to transfer various Starship hardware elements out to the launch complex. And then it'll head north when it takes that turn, and then eventually, after a mile or two, take a right turn and head east, right past our camera position next to the vehicle assembly building. We'll see a much closer view of this segment when it nears our camera position, and then east toward Launch Complex 39A. This is the third segment, as I've mentioned, that will be moved out to Pad 39A. The first segment moved out to the Launch Complex on June the 15th to begin the construction of this tower, which will stand next to the fully stacked Super Heavy and Starship vehicles out at Pad 39A in the future. Segment number 2 moved out to the pad last Wednesday, June 22nd, and tonight segment number 3 is joining segments 1 and 2 at the launch pad. This move began a little earlier than the past 2 segment moves began. Those began a little closer to nightfall here on Florida's Space Coast. This one began with some daylight still visible to give us a good visibility of the segment behind these trees. And we expect this move to resume in a short period of time to continue the rollout to Pad 39A. The launch pad SpaceX is building at the Kennedy Space Center is expected to very closely resemble the facility that SpaceX has constructed in South Texas near Boca Chica Beach, east of Brownsville, Texas, with a large gantry tower that stands more than 400 feet tall. And then the Starship vehicle itself with the Super Heavy booster and the Starship upper stage together will stand about 400 feet tall or 120 meters in height. Earlier in the spring of this year, SpaceX built up the foundation for this launch pad tower. They also brought in elements of the pedestal or launch mount that the Super Heavy booster will stand upon at Pad 39A. The facility for the Starship vehicle is located about 1,000 feet or 300 meters east of Pad 39A. And once this tower segment begins its move and heads east toward Pad 39A, we should get a good view from our camera site of the segment with Pad 39A in the background, and you'll get a better feel of the location of the Starship tower in relation to the existing fixed service structure at Pad 39A, which is used for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy launches conducted by SpaceX. Again, this is the third of as many as 9 tower segments. There are 9 segments in total that went up at Boca Chica at SpaceX's so-called Starbase facility for the Starship vehicle. And the layout of the facility under construction here in Florida is expected to be very much the same. There have been hints that there may be a few minor changes based on lessons learned, but we do expect potentially 8 or 9 segments to go up at Pad 39A in the coming weeks. With segment 3 on the road on the move tonight, there are 3 additional segments that are currently visible being readied for their moves to Pad 39A in the coming weeks. These segments remain in a yard outside of Hangar X, which is SpaceX's Falcon rocket refurbishment facility at the Roberts Road site. Again, the Roberts Road site is an area of property leased from NASA by SpaceX, where SpaceX has built this Hangar X facility for rocket refurbishment and integration, as well as SpaceX also plans to use this area for a Starship factory in the future. Right now, the Roberts Road facility is being used for the buildup and integration of these various elements of the Starship launch pad tower. These elements will also include arms that will extend from the tower. Those are expected to be added later on in the construction process in the coming weeks or months. These arms will be used to actually stack the Starship on top of the Super Heavy booster. Will also be used potentially to stack the Super Heavy booster onto its launch mount at Pad 39A before each mission. And SpaceX also intends for these arms, which are called chopsticks colloquially, to be used to catch the Super Heavy booster when it comes in for landing. The Super Heavy will be reusable, as will the Starship, to make a fully reusable Super Heavy lift commercial launcher. Right now, SpaceX's Falcon rocket fleet is partially reusable, with the booster stage and the payload fairings reusable, good for multiple missions. However, the second stage, with its second stage engine, is still a single-use item. And SpaceX wants this next generation vehicle, the Starship, to be a fully reusable rocket and launch vehicle, and also an in-space transporter to carry cargo and people between various destinations in space. Now we see the Starship tower segment on the move again, making a left turn from its previous easterly heading to turn to a northerly direction, heading toward the vehicle assembly building at KSC. Again, the blue building you're seeing in the background is one of the structures built by Blue Origin to support the manufacturing and testing of New Glenn rocket elements, rocket stages for the Blue Origin New Glenn launch vehicle, which remains in development at this time. One interesting aspect of following this tower segment move in daytime before nightfall is you'll get a view of various parts of the Space Center. And I'll try to point some of those out as we see them if the visibility remains good. In the background, we should see the vehicle assembly building a little bit later, and also the NASA Artemis 1 moon rocket out on pad 39B when this Starship segment passes in front of that pad. And then finally, pad 39A itself, which is home to SpaceX's Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy program. This tower segment is riding a transporter, a multi-wheel transporter, specially designed to carry hardware elements for the Starship between facilities here at the Kennedy Space Center. In this case, it's carrying a ground support fixture, part of the launch pad gantry tower toward pad 39A. This journey is about 7 miles between the Roberts Road staging site and pad 39A by road. In the background now, you can see some of the cranes, which are actually at the Roberts Road facility. These are the cranes that are being used either to build up these tower segments or to also work on construction of buildings for the Starship factory, which is going to be springing up at Roberts Road. Again, the Roberts Road facility is an area of property leased by SpaceX from NASA, located at the Kennedy Space Center. It's a previously undeveloped area where SpaceX in the past couple of years has built a facility they call Hangar X, used for Falcon 9 booster refurbishment and fairing refurbishment, as well as storage and integration of first and second stages for Falcon 9 missions. Now you're seeing in the background part of the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, where a full-scale mock-up of a space shuttle external tank, that's the orange bullet-shaped structure in the background, with two replicas of solid rocket boosters are vertically displayed. The gray building to the left of that is the exhibit that houses the real Space Shuttle Atlantis, one of NASA's 3 decommissioned space-flown orbiters. Again, the segment you're seeing is about 5 stories in height, and it takes up the entire width of a 2-lane roadway. This 5-story tall structure continues to head north on Kennedy Parkway. This is about a 1 to 1.5 mile straightaway before this gantry tower takes a right turn and heads east. Should get a good view here in a couple of minutes, a couple seconds rather, coming into view a little better now as it heads through a gap in the trees. And there will be a couple of times in the next few minutes where the tower segment passes behind some buildings at the Kennedy Space Center. This is going to be one of those times. Most of this gantry segment, tower segment, will be obscured here for a few moments as it heads north behind this building. We do expect the tower to reemerge here in a few moments. Still heading north on Kennedy Parkway toward the vehicle assembly building, the iconic 525-foot tall integration hangar used for assembling various rockets throughout the history of the American space program. A lot of very famous rockets have been stacked inside the VAB. You'll get a good look at the VAB here in a few minutes. We're continuing to monitor tower segment number 3, rolling out to pad 39A. This is the third segment to be moved out to the launch complex for stacking as SpaceX builds out their second Starship launch pad following construction of the first Starship pad in South Texas. The lion's share of the construction, at least the structural elements, was completed last year at Boca Chica in Texas for the first Starship orbital launch site. And orbital launch site number 2 for Starship on the east coast of Florida is now well under construction. You're continuing to see the very top or uppermost part of segment number 3 moving behind one of the buildings here at the Kennedy Space Center. Our camera operator is tracking this segment as it heads north. And you're going to get an excellent view, very fantastic view in a few minutes of this entire segment, 5 stories tall, as it heads past our position and right by the vehicle assembly building on the way to pad 39A. It's a pleasant evening at the Kennedy Space Center as the sun sinks in the western horizon, heading towards sunset in less than a half hour or so. This structure now re-emerging from behind the building at the Kennedy Space Center. We expect it to pass behind one more building before it re-emerges for good and heads east toward our camera position. This is the third segment that we've seen roll out to pad 39A for the Starship orbital launch tower. The first was on June 15th. The second was last week on June 22nd. We've brought you each of these moves live, just as we bring you live launch coverage from Florida Space Coast and other locations around the world, as well as our daily coverage of the space program and space industry. A really nice view now of the tower segment. You can see what I believe is a stairwell that's been built into this tower segment for personnel to access various sections and levels of the tower. And now this building, this gantry is heading behind one of the buildings at the Kennedy Space Center. It'll be hidden behind this building for just a few minutes at most if it remains moving at this pace, and will reemerge on the north or right side of this building in a couple of minutes. If you like our coverage of events like this, you can support our coverage by becoming a Spaceflight Now member. If you go to our homepage at www.spaceflightnow.com and click on the members tab at the top of the homepage, if you contribute to our membership program and become a member yourself, you can not only support our coverage and help us continue and improve what we do, bringing you events like this, but you'll have access to an exclusive live stream during daylight hours of ongoing construction at pad 39A. And you won't miss a thing with these activities going on at pad 39A with a continuous live stream for our members as the construction of SpaceX's second Starship launch pad continues on Florida Space Coast. You can also become a YouTube member for Spaceflight Now, click the Join tab just below the video screen you're seeing now to help support our coverage in that way. And we also invite you to contribute through the Super Chat function on YouTube as well. Any support you can provide, we would greatly appreciate. You're now seeing the segment behind some of the windows. It's an interesting view coming out from behind some of the windows of the OSB-2 office building at the Kennedy Space Center, and now has reemerged coming up on this intersection to head east toward Pad 39A. Has now made that turn and is heading east, not wasting much time. Again, this is moving a little earlier in the evening than the previous two segments. The previous two segments moved in nighttime. This one moving with the sun still in the sky, heading towards sunset here in Central Florida. Great close-up view here of this unique transporter that SpaceX is using to transfer various elements of the Starship gantry tower between facilities. Again, this is a prefabricated tower that was assembled and integrated at the SpaceX Roberts Road facility a few miles away, and is making the 7-mile journey by road tonight toward Pad 39A. This convoy is accompanied by KSC, NASA security, SpaceX security, and support personnel. You can see a few Kennedy Space Center employees have gathered to watch this thing on the move tonight. Going to get a great view of this transporter, which itself is an impressive, very interesting machine with all these wheels designed for heavy loads. Transferring this on a regular 2-lane road and used by daily traffic here at KSC. Again, the entire gantry segment is about 5 stories tall. And up to 9 of these will be stacked together at pad 39A to create a structure that will stand more than 400 feet tall when complete. Will become one of the tallest structures on the Space Coast. We believe the second tallest, almost as tall as the Vehicle Assembly Building. Wonderful view now of the gantry segment on the move, passing by the road that leads into the Vehicle Assembly Building transfer aisle. That's where Saturn rocket stages, space shuttle external tanks, and the core stage of the Space Launch System arrive. They travel that road in the background into the transfer aisle for stacking. Great view of this transporter now heading east, and a wider view now of the transporter passing by the Vehicle Assembly Building. An impressive sight always to see the VAB. Even more interesting with this structure heading toward pad 39A tonight. And it looks like the transporter has stopped. We saw this vehicle stop around this location on the previous 2 rollouts of the first 2 tower segments for the Starship pad. We're not sure why it stops at this location, but this seems to be the norm for these rollouts. Beautiful evening, as I said, here on the Space Coast of Florida with the sun approaching sunset. And this structure now on the move again, slowly, continuing its eastbound sojourn toward pad 39A. See one of the SpaceX support personnel there. Gives a good idea of the scale of this thing. 5 stories in height. 9 of these segments will be stacked at pad 39A, we believe 9. At least that's how many were stacked in Texas for the first Starship pad. And the entire structure will stand between 400 and 500 feet tall when completed. Just for comparison, the Starship tower segment that you're seeing is about 5 stories tall. It's a little bit taller, although not much taller than the Rocket 3.3 launch vehicle developed by Astra to haul small satellites into orbit. So it's about the same height. This actual structure is a little bit taller, though, than Astra's Rocket 3.3 launch vehicle. It's just shy by just a few feet of the height of Rocket Lab's Electron rocket for small satellite missions. So it gives you a sense of the scale of this structure and the scale of those small launch vehicles. And then again, you're seeing this support employee monitoring this move as this transporter heads eastbound. And the journey appears to have resumed at full speed now, as the Starship has just passed by the vehicle assembly building and is headed past the Launch Control Center, which you see in the background to the left on this field of view. You're seeing a tighter view now of the 96-wheel transporter carrying this Starship tower segment toward its future home and placement on pad 39A. It'll join the first or lowermost two segments already stacked on the foundation for this giant structure being erected out at the Seaside Launch Complex, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, about 3 miles east of its current location. Pad 39A is about 3 miles east of the vehicle assembly building. Does appear the team is taking it slow through this section of the road. Looked like there's a plate in place on the side of the road to enable the transporter to get safely through this area. It does appear also that some of the tires, at least from this vantage point, some of the wheels are making their way into the grass on the side of the road. Another plate is in place up here just ahead. Interesting to watch here as this transporter navigates this stretch of road. You see some of the wheels turning to keep this entire structure aligned. The motors that drive the transporter are located on the rear end of this vehicle. 96 wheels in total carrying this segment to the pad tonight. And after navigating a little bit of a perilous, narrow stretch of roadway, the tower segment has now accelerated back to full speed on this 96-wheel transporter on this two-lane road. This two-lane road is about to reach the crawlerway, which is the pathway used to transfer rockets out to Complex 39 from the vehicle assembly building. It was used, originally built in the Apollo era for the Saturn V moon rocket, and was later used by the space shuttle, and is now used for rollouts and rollbacks of the Space Launch System moon rocket, the first of which is now fully stacked on Pad 39B and has been undergoing some testing in recent weeks. It completed a full loading of cryogenic propellants last Monday, June 20th, in a key countdown rehearsal test, and is now being readied for rollback to the vehicle assembly building this coming Friday, in just a few days' time at the end of the week, where it will be undergo some final repairs to a hydrogen leak, and as well as undergo final testing and closeouts and arming before returning to Pad 39B sometime as soon as next month for a launch in late August or early September. That's the best case schedule NASA has laid out for the launch of the Artemis 1 moon mission. This was the first test flight of the SLS moon rocket and the Orion spacecraft to the moon, and it'll pave the way for future lunar missions with astronauts. You'll see that Artemis 1 moon rocket in just a few moments as the Starship tower segment passes in front of Pad 39B heading east. The Starship rocket itself is also an element of NASA's Artemis moon program. NASA selected a derivative or version of the Starship that's under development by SpaceX for the agency's human landing system contract last April. And SpaceX is working on a lunar lander version of the Starship to actually carry crews between the Orion spacecraft, which it's launched on the Space Launch System, and the lunar surface, and then back to the Orion spacecraft, which will bring the astronauts back to Earth. So this is all part of a multi-element, multi-component, multi-contract architecture that NASA has developed and is now fine-tuning for the Artemis lunar program. The goal, according to NASA, is to land astronauts back on the surface of the moon as soon as 2025. However, various independent experts, including NASA's own Inspector General, report that is unlikely due to various issues and schedule pressures, including the development of new lunar-rated spacesuits, the launch cadence that is available for the Space Launch System and the Orion spacecraft, which is not as rapid as NASA's Inspector General says it needs to be to facilitate regular missions to the moon, as well as the development of the human landing system itself, which is also one of the big technical challenges that NASA and SpaceX are working on. Those are three of the major roadblocks right now that could delay the lunar landing with astronauts. NASA's Artemis 1 moon rocket looms in the background, 322 feet or 98 meters in height on pad 39B. This rocket has been undergoing testing in recent weeks, as I mentioned, including a full loading of cryogenic propellants last Monday, a week ago tonight. And the countdown last Monday during this rehearsal run proceeded down to T-minus 29 seconds. NASA says they got enough data from that test to be able to move forward with the rest of the Artemis 1 launch campaign, and hopes are high among NASA officials here at the Kennedy Space Center that the Artemis 1 mission will be ready for launch by late summer or fall. Right now, the earliest feasible, realistic launch date for Artemis 1 is in late August. NASA will set an official target launch date in the coming weeks once the Space Launch System is back inside the vehicle assembly building for these final tasks that include a repair of a hydrogen leak that was detected out of the pad last Monday, as well as previously planned work to inspect and close out various parts of the rocket, perform a test of the flat termination system, which is the destruct system for public safety purposes on board the vehicle, as well as final stowing of cargo and payloads and experiments inside the crew cabin, the pressurized compartment of the Orion spacecraft, which will include a test dummy on this mission heading out to the moon. Fantastic view if you're a space fan of a moon rocket in the background, and it's the largest rocket that will ever fly from the Kennedy Space Center is in the background until SpaceX's Starship flies in the coming years from the Kennedy Space Center. The Starship stands about 400 feet tall. The Space Launch System in the background, 322 feet. Both of those vehicles, by large measure, are taller and more powerful than any other rocket in the world right now. Again, the Artemis 1 moon rocket you see in the background on pad 39B is now being prepared for its return to the vehicle assembly building on Friday morning for final launch preparations on the long delayed Artemis 1 test flight, now potentially just a couple of months away. In the meantime, in the foreground, tonight's operation is now over halfway complete distance-wise. The 7-mile journey from Roberts Road, which is where SpaceX has been building up and fabricating the Starship launch pad tower elements, was a departure point for this convoy earlier this evening, and it's headed out toward pad 39A, another stop here by this transporter. Now we're observing this transporter has stopped again. We did see this stop several times previously during tonight's operation, as well as last week during segment number 2 when it was moved out to pad 39A. So we'll stand by for this rollout to resume. And the move has resumed again moments ago. Convoy now making good time heading east toward pad 39A. About 3 miles of this 7-mile journey remain ahead of the convoy this evening. And now you're seeing a wonderful view of Launch Complex 39A in the distance as this Starship Tower segment number 3 continues its journey eastbound toward its destination. At the far right of your screen, you can see this large crane that was recently raised at pad 39A for the stacking of the various segments of the Starship launch gantry tower. Next to that crane sit the lowermost 2 segments of the tower, which were moved out to pad 39A earlier this month. The first of those segments, the lowermost, rolled out back on June the 15th from Roberts Road to pad 39A. And then last Wednesday night, June 22nd, the second tower segment made its journey to 39A. And then tonight, the third of as many as 9 eventual segments that will make this move is on the way to the Starship pad at pad 39A. Again, this tower will dominate the coastline on Florida Space Coast. It'll stand about 450 feet, approximately 450 feet in height, roughly matching the height of the Starship tower in South Texas at SpaceX's Starbase facility at Boca Chica Beach. It'll dwarf the fixed service structure on the left-hand side of your screen. It'll stand about twice as tall, roughly, as the fixed service structure on the left-hand side of your screen. That's the black building that sits at the center of pad 39A. It's used to support Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy launches, and was originally built and placed at pad 39A for the space shuttle. Here you can get a really broad perspective of the landscape. On the right side of your screen, the hangar that has SpaceX emblazoned on the side is where Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets are integrated with their payloads. And then to the left of that, about midway between the hangar and pad 39A itself, is this Starship launch site with the crane visible, and the 2 segments already in place. And then on the left-hand side of your screen is pad 39A, where Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets depart planet Earth. The transporter erector or strongback arm continues to sit in a horizontal position at pad 39A from the previous Falcon 9 launch a week ago Friday, a little more than a week ago. And at some point in the coming days, we expect to see that transporter move back inside the hangar down the ramp and be integrated with the next Falcon 9 mission that will depart from this launch complex. Busy times at the spaceport here in Florida with construction activity, rocket launches, rollouts, near daily occurrence now at the various launch pads at the Kennedy Space Center and at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station next door. Later this week, there are 2 orbital launches on the schedule from here in Florida. SpaceX is readying a Falcon 9 rocket for liftoff Wednesday evening with the SES-22 commercial communications satellite that'll support TV broadcasts over the United States. That launch is scheduled for 5:04 p.m. Eastern Time, 21:04 UTC Wednesday. And then 25 hours later, United Launch Alliance is set to launch an Atlas V rocket from pad 41 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, the pad next to pad 40. This Atlas V mission will haul into geosynchronous orbit. A couple of technology demonstration satellites for the United States Space Force. This mission on Thursday evening by ULA is set for liftoff in a window opening at 6 p.m. Eastern Time or 2200 UTC. So 2 back-to-back late afternoon / early evening launches on tap this week at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Those pads just off your screen to the right as this camera continues to be aimed at pad 39A at KSC. You're now seeing a really nice view of the Starship tower taking shape on the left-hand side of this screen with that crane next to it, with the segment number 3 now in the final stretch of its trip out to pad 39A to join those two segments already placed onto their foundation. This Starship launch site is about 1,000 feet or about 300 meters east of the existing complex 39A pad where Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets launch from. In this view, you can see the tower segment now making its way around the gantry at the visitor complex viewing gantry, located near the location where the crawlerway splits. This crawlerway leads from the vehicle assembly building and was originally built during the Apollo program in the 1960s. One branch of the crawlerway, which is essentially a dual carriageway, heads east from this location toward pad 39A. That crawlerway segment is no longer in operation, no longer in service, because SpaceX does not use the crawlerway for its Falcon rocket operations. In fact, the hangar that SpaceX erected just on the southern perimeter of pad 39A actually blocks the crawlerway and will block any transfer of rockets along that existing pathway from the VAB to pad 39A. The northern branch of the crawlerway that splits off at this location heads north toward pad B at Launch Complex 39, where the Space Launch System moon rocket is currently sitting or standing after completing a countdown rehearsal last Monday, a week ago tonight. In this view, you can just make out the outline of SpaceX's Falcon 9 hangar at pad 39A with the southern door opened up at an angle, and the light from inside that structure now flowing out of that door. We expect to see this tower segment as it nears pad 39A in the coming minutes to actually pass behind or on the far side of that hangar. It'll disappear for a short period of time and then reappear as it makes its way inside the fence and toward the Starship launch site, where it will stop at a staging position to allow the crane that's been erected at pad 39A to move over with a spreader arm and actually grab onto the top of this segment and lift it on top of segments 1 and 2. Tonight, you're watching the third tower segment move out toward pad 39A. This is the third of as many as 9 sections that'll be stacked over the course of the next coming weeks to fully construct, at least structurally, this structure that will stand more than 400 feet tall. An update on the move of the tower segment number 3 for SpaceX's Starship launch complex here at the Kennedy Space Center. This tower segment is riding a 96-wheel transporter from SpaceX's facility at Roberts Road, which is in the southwestern part of the Kennedy Space Center, southwest of the Vehicle Assembly Building, out to Launch Complex 39A tonight. And the tower segment has begun to make its left-hand turn following a curve in the roadway to head toward the home stretch of the journey on the way to pad 39A. It's approaching the Falcon 9 hangar now with the door open. That door is the door that's used to transfer payloads into the hangar for integration with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets, including the Crew Dragon spacecraft, which is prepared for launch and fueled at a facility over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, and then moved over to the hangar that you're seeing here at pad 39A at KSC for integration with the launch vehicle. So that hangar is a critical piece of infrastructure for the Falcon 9 program, and SpaceX's next generation Starship program is in a rapid phase of expansion, with the first launch pad complete down in Texas at Boca Chica Beach on the South Texas Gulf Coast, and the second Starship launch pad now well under construction on Florida's Space Coast. As this transporter and tower section prepare to move inside the fence out at pad 39A, we do expect to lose our visual on the tower segment as it passes on the other side, on the far side of the hangar in a few minutes, but it will reemerge in the final few moments of the journey toward its stopping point, which will be a staging position right next to the crane out at pad 39A, as well as next to the lowermost segments 1 and number 2, already in place at the Starship pad. And then once the transporter comes to a stop in the coming hours and days, we expect to see that crane move over the tower section, grapple onto it, and lift it onto the top of section number 2. And with that, the tower out at pad 39A will actually be standing about 15 stories in height. Each of these sections is about 5 stories tall. When the section number 2 moved out to the pad last week, last Wednesday, we saw the crane lift section number 2 onto section number 1 the morning after the transfer. So if SpaceX works that quickly, we could see segment number 3 stacked as soon as tomorrow morning. And we've now seen the tower segment disappear behind the Falcon 9 hangar. As expected, we expect to see that reemerge in a few minutes, moving right to left in this view toward the crane and the orbital launch site number 2 for SpaceX's Super Heavy booster and Starship program, following up on the construction of the first launch site for the Starship program in Texas. And here comes tower segment number 3 from behind the hangar out at Launch Complex 39A. This obscured our view of the tower segment for the last few minutes. And with the tower segment now back in view, coming into view now, it's in the final stretch of its journey to a staging point right next to the orbital launch site and within the reach of that giant crane you may have seen earlier in our broadcast tonight. The crane now visible here on the left-hand side of your screen, well lit out there tonight for this operation. And once the transporter comes to a stop, preparations will get underway to move that crane over the tower segment and lift it onto segments number 1 and 2. You see on the left-hand side of your screen already in place on the foundation that SpaceX teams constructed over the last few months. All this is taking shape for the Starship program just about 1,000 feet or 300 meters east of pad 39A itself, the center of the pad, on top of that mound that was originally constructed during the Apollo program, and that's where Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets take off today. So Kennedy Space Center is already a multi-user spaceport, and pad 39A is soon to be a multi-user pad. Both users happen to be SpaceX, but 2 different programs, 2 different rockets will be launching out of 39A. While we wait for the tower segment to fully emerge, we invite you to support our coverage by joining our YouTube channel. If you join our channel, you can support coverage like this, as well as launch coverage here on Florida's Space Coast and at locations around the world, as well as our continuing daily news stories at spaceflightnow.com. You can also go to spaceflightnow.com, our homepage, and click the members tab at the top of the homepage to become a Spaceflight Now member. Again, the members have access to an exclusive live stream during daytime hours of pad 39A, so you won't miss any of the action in daylight as SpaceX works on building out this infrastructure to support future launches of the Super Heavy booster and the Starship vehicle. Again, this rocket fully stacked will stand 400 feet tall. We've seen it fully stacked down in Texas. And as SpaceX prepares for the first orbital test flight of the Super Heavy and Starship from Boca Chica in Texas later this year. And ultimately, SpaceX will have an operational launch site here in Florida for the Starship program. As you can see, the side of this tower segment is just peeking out from behind the hangar. The motion appears to have stopped, at least temporarily. It's not quite into the position that we expect it to go to tonight, based on what we saw for the moves of tower segments 1 and 2 earlier this month. Those segments moved up closer to the crane from this segment's current location. So we do anticipate the motion to resume and head north further into the pad to finally come to a stop close to this crane. It needs to move a little closer to the crane to allow that device to reach over and grab onto the top of the segment to stack it on top of the existing segments already in place. And here we see the tower segment back in motion again. After a pause of a few minutes, this segment now fully emerging from behind the hangar. On the move once more, now just has as little as a few hundred feet to go. Just a few hundred feet to go until the position where the previous two segments came to a halt before they're stacking. So we'll continue tracking this for the next few minutes as it moves into position under the reach of this crane that's in position out at pad 39A. This segment or section for SpaceX's launch pad tower for the Super Heavy and Starship rocket program is now very, very near its final stopping point tonight. You can see the crane that will be used to hoist this structure into the air and on top of the growing tower on the left-hand side of this view. And we expect this segment and its transporter to come to a stop just to the right of the crane, as the previous two segments did when they were transferred out to Pad 39A earlier this month. With this segment nearing its final stopping position tonight, there are 3 Starship tower segments now inside the fence at Pad 39A. 2 are already stacked on their foundation on the left side of your screen, just to the left of the pipe-like structures that extend from the ground. That's the mounting point where the Starship or Super Heavy booster at least will be positioned for testing and launch operations. There are 3 more Starship tower segments at various stages of readiness outside of SpaceX's Roberts Road facility, where teams have been fabricating and integrating these structural elements over the last few months. Eventually, we expect there to be as many as 9 individual segments that are transferred out to Pad 39A to fully construct this giant tower, which will stand more than 400 feet tall when complete. 9 tower segments were used to stack the pad gantry at Boca Chica in Texas. And we expect this launch complex to bear a lot of resemblance to the Starbase facility in South Texas, although there may be some differences. SpaceX teams have learned some lessons from their work in Texas, so there may be a few changes in store here in Florida. It appears as if the tower segment number 3 has come to a stop, roughly in the same location where segments 1 and 2 came to a stop when they were transferred out to pad 39A earlier this month. The next step we expect to see is this crane move into position over the tower segment and then lift that tower segment onto segments 1 and 2 on the left-hand side of the crane as viewed from our camera position roughly a few miles away from pad 39A. After the arrival of segment number 2 last Wednesday night, that crane got into action pretty quickly to lift that section onto the section number 1 the following morning after the rollout. So we'll see if they move as fast with segment number 3. With that, we're going to conclude the live commentary portion of our coverage tonight. We'll keep this stream up for a little while longer to show you continued views of pad 39A tonight. For those of you who became members of the Spaceflight Now YouTube channel tonight, we appreciate your support. Your support goes a long way toward helping us continue our coverage and expand our coverage of the rapid pace of operations and construction here on Florida's Space Coast, with numerous rockets flying and more soon to be flying from Central Florida. We also thank those of you who supported us through our Super Chat function. And if you've become a Spaceflight Now member at spaceflightnow.com, we appreciate your support there as well. Later this week, we'll be covering a number of launches, 2 of which are scheduled to blast off from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, just a few miles to the south of the location you're viewing now. SpaceX is scheduled to launch a Falcon 9 rocket Wednesday evening at 5:04 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 21:04 UTC, from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This mission will be deploying a communications satellite for SES. This satellite, named SES-22, will be heading toward geosynchronous orbit more than 22,000 miles over the equator to provide C-band TV broadcasting coverage and cable television programming over the United States. That'll be followed on Thursday night, roughly 25 hours later, by the liftoff of a United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket from Pad 41 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This ULA mission will be carrying 2 technology demonstration payloads or satellites into geosynchronous orbit as well for the United States Space Force. Also this week, we'll be covering on our website the launch of Virgin Orbit's airdropped launch vehicle called Launcher 1. That mission is scheduled to launch from a Boeing 747 carrier jet off the coast of Southern California at around 10 p.m. Pacific time, or 1 a.m. Eastern time, 10 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesday night, 1 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday morning, with several small satellites for the Space Force on that mission. And then Friday, we'll be covering the rollback or return to the vehicle assembly building by NASA's Artemis 1 moon rocket, which has been out on pad 39B since early June undergoing testing. NASA is scheduled to move that 322-foot tall launch vehicle back to the VAB on Friday morning for final checkouts and repairs, and also some closeouts and testing of the flight termination system. These are the final checks that are necessary to ready the Space Launch System for liftoff on its first test flight That launch could occur in late August or early September if these preparations go on schedule. So a busy week ahead. Our coverage got underway tonight with the transfer of tower segment number 3 for SpaceX's Starship Launch Integration Tower to Pad 39A. In addition to these launches and movements of the Artemis 1 moon rocket, we'll also be standing by in the coming days to cover additional segments that SpaceX transfers out to Pad 39A to continue the construction of the Starship launch pad. So with that, I'm Stephen Clark reporting from Kennedy Space Center. Thank you for joining us tonight for our coverage, and we'll see you soon for launch coverage. More launches on tap this week by SpaceX and United Launch Alliance and Virgin Orbit. Thanks for joining us, and have a pleasant evening.